In this video, we're going to have a look at some of the miter options that are available inside of the library. And so here we have some miter options. If we go to our globals under machining, we have miter options, and then we have three different options for how we actually construct the miters. And so this is specifically for 45-degree miters. On the edge of panels, and so we have the option to miter offline. So if you want to cut the parts square and then take them to a table saw to cut the miter, you can do that. If you want to miter them on the CNC, you can use a V-bit in order to create those miters on each individual part on the CNC. And in order to do that, you'll want to make sure that your parts are spaced out a little farther than normal, because on a 45-degree tool, you're going to need to have at least the thickness of the material between your parts. So you want to make sure that you added the space between your parts to account for that. And then the other option is to use miter fold. And so miter fold is going to create one part for all the parts of a miter item, and then it's going to cut most of the way through. And then you can take that off, apply some glue, and fold that together. And so that's what the miter fold option is. So I'm just going to set this to use miter on CNC for now. And so in our mitered, or in our finished legs and end panels folder, we can find some mitered products that use the miter fold settings that we set there. So if we go to a mitered end panel, we can say place product at selected point, and we'll just say 0, 0. And so here we can specify whatever the width is for that. So this is basically like an end wall. We can say it's 5 inches wide. We have some construction options, whether it has a left or right finished end. If we say maybe it's going up against another cabinet, we can uncheck the finished end, and it's only going to have a return left depth of 4 inches or whatever we specify there in order to make that product. And we have some material options and that sort of thing that we can edit on there as well. It's either a base, tall, or upper panel, and that's just going to control the defaults for the height as well as the height above floor option. And so we'll go ahead and say OK. And so here you can see I've got my mitered panel, and so maybe this is a decorative column between parts, but you can see it's made individual parts for that, for each of those items, and that's how they're going to be cut out on the CNC, and that's how they'll be manufactured as well. So if I take this and I'll say copy that, and I'll just make another one of those just to show the difference between my options here. And so then I have the option on my construction for use miter fold as well. And so use miter fold is actually going to make one part that's going to be cut onto the cut list, and there you can see it's making that part with the folds cut in it in order to take that part and fold it up once we manufacture that. So we'll go ahead and create a work order from those parts. And so here you can see I've got for my two different items. So my first item was 104, and that was the one that had the individual parts, and then the other one was 103, and so you can see it's only outputting one part onto the cut list. The other thing that I want to do here is go, and I've created a new mitered processing station, and the only difference between that one and my default nesting station is that I do in fact have more distance between my parts. And so if I go to my nest settings, I've adjusted that to have a 1-inch distance between parts, and that just allows me to use my 3/4 inch material with a bit of space when the miter tool comes to the edge. It's not going to damage the parts beside it. And so here in my nest you can see the machining for that part, and so there's my routing for that routing operation. And so if I bring in my tool there, I just need to make sure that it's not going to damage that part and adjust my spacing between parts accordingly. And so it's this is the miter fold part, right? So that's one part that's machining part of the way into the material and leaving a bit at the bottom. And then these are my individual miter parts, and they're going to cut all the way through the material right down to the spoil board. And those come through with the machining for the individual parts there. And so there I can see I've got my 3 parts to make up the one that was not miter fold, and my 1 part for the one that was miter fold. So now I've gone ahead and added a mitered shelf from that same folder into my product here. I just placed it beside my mitered panel. And you can see that here's the miter fold blank. I turned on the miter fold for that, and you can see that the blank is becoming quite complex when we have to fold those parts back together. Depending on how the grain direction settings are set, it will adjust that miter fold blank accordingly. And so right now I have the grain direction running horizontally all the way around, and so it's creating that piece off the end. If I change the end grain direction to be vertical, then it would add that piece on to the end of the blank there. And so you just have to think about how you're creating that part and whether you're going to have a sheet size that's large enough to do that as a miter fold part, or if you just want to do it as individual part miters. You can see here from my shelf that it's included a cleat on the unfinished end, and it's miter folded that end cap on the finished end. If I wanted to adjust that miter fold end grain direction, I could go to my subassembly prompts here and say show subassembly prompts, and you can see that those are grayed out, and that's because there's this override product values box, and so if I check that I could modify them, but I just want to show you where that data is coming from as well. So if we go to edit design data on the product itself, there's a lookup table in these miterfold products at the product level that's defining the details for each of those subassemblies based on the bay position. So if I go to my subassembly miter box, you can see I'm using bay position 76. So if I wanted to use something different, I could just enter any different number in here and then change the values for this particular one. But here I'll just say that I want to use a vertical ends, and so I'll just change that to a 0 and redraw that product. And so there you can see I've changed to a horizontal end, a vertical end, and so now it's going to put that piece on the end of one of the sides and create that machining accordingly.